Brandon Johnson's transition report, published last week, is full of ideas for the city to spend money. That's easy. It's like having a catalog. I'll take that and that and that. Amazon will deliver it. They want to create a Department of Neighborhood Equity and Repair. Okay. Want to reopen mental health clinics, and a bunch of them. Build up a non-police emergency response team, and more. But absent from his 224-page report are any proposals whatsoever for how the city can raise more revenue. Johnson has promised during the campaign to raise $800 million in new revenue, all without touching property taxes. That is, of course, the kryptonite, property taxes. Nobody wants to raise property taxes. That's typically how cities come up with money they need in a pinch. Now let's welcome Alex Nitkin, who's gone through the report. He's a terrific reporter for Illinois Answers. He's their project solutions reporter, conducting deep dives, investigations on efforts to fix broken systems in Chicago, Cook County, and Illinois government in general. Alex, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. I appreciate it. What are the options for raising $800 million this year for this wish list from Mayor Johnson?
Yeah, that's the huge question, and thanks for having me on, John, but there are not a whole lot of couch cushions for the city to look under here. Usually, property taxes are the main lever for mayors to pull. It's the closest thing, most direct way for them to just come up with money they need. They don't need permission from anyone. They can just, except for the city council, to just do it. And so, as you mentioned at the opening there, Johnson has promised not just to expand the social services of the city, but also to fix what he calls the structural deficit, to, basically get the city back in good health financially. And so in his plan, two of the biggest money-making ideas that he had were, number one, to put a financial transactions tax on trade, sometimes called the LaSalle Street tax. This has, been proposed for a long time, but it really seems dead on arrival in Springfield, where it would need approval. Another proposal he came up with, or he offered, was to put what's called a head tax, a big business head tax, an employee tax on businesses. Also pretty unpopular with the city council, where he would need to get it passed. And so it's quickly, it seems like, especially as budget season gets closer, we're all just sort of waiting for the big revenue raising idea. And that's where we started really exploring the possibility of a city income tax, which, again, I should clarify, the mayor and his administration have not endorsed in any way, but some of their allies are starting to say, hey, this is something that really deserves attention now.
So are they trial balloons, essentially? If his allies, his political supporters, are saying it's time to have a city income tax, maybe a 3.5% tax on household income above $100,000. Plus, I would assume this would also include commuter taxes, people who work in the city, even if they don't live in the city, correct?
Right. I mean, there are a number of ways that this could be done, and we looked at different municipalities and states around the country that do it in different ways. Some of them, like in New York City, you are charged an income tax based on whether you spend more than half of your days in the city, and they sort of have their own unique way of calculating that. In other cities, it's just if you work in the city and, your employer is withholding income taxes, they would also withhold the city income tax. So there are different ways to do it. Researchers basically say that however the state taxes income, the city should just sort of piggyback on that and do it the same way for administrative purposes. So it could be a number of ways. They predict, though, that advocates behind this, with groups like United Working Families and the People's Policy Agenda, say that this could bring in up to $2 billion, and most of that would be from residents of the city, and some of it would also, they say, be from commuters.
This proposal would laws would have to be changed in Springfield, correct?
That's right. There are 15 states across the country, plus Washington, D.C., where municipalities or school districts or local bodies are allowed to levy income taxes. And there are a number of states, like I mentioned, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, some red states like Kentucky and Alabama, where it's really common for cities to impose income taxes of 1%, 2%, or 3%. But yeah, it's not legal in the state of Illinois, so it would need a change in state law, and that could look like either one of these laws that's like, okay, this policy is only allowed in cities of more than 1 million people, i.e. just in Chicago, or they could say it's allowed in Cook County, or, theoretically they could say any city in the state could do it. But it would need that approval from Springfield.
Alex Nitkin is here, Illinois Answers Project Solutions reporter. We're talking about the possibility of a city Chicago income tax. Now, property taxes are very efficient and sales taxes are quite reliable. But aren't you going to have people running out of Cook County, running out of the city? Because this is going to be very, very tenuous as far as who owes what, especially when you're talking about people who don't live here but just work here. How do you collect it?
Right. Well, as I said, there are a number of different ways that it could be collected. It could be either done through employers or done sort of on top of the state income tax, the same way that the state collects its income tax. It's interesting you bring up, this is a big fear that a lot of folks express that, it could sort of any kind of progressive tax or tax on higher earners could drive people out of the city. When you talk to researchers and folks, we talk to folks at the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation, which does a lot of research around income taxes in particular. And one of the things they say is that, so far there's really not a lot of evidence that these kinds of higher income taxes or tax on high earners will make people leave the city, but they do introduce a much bigger issue, which is that you just don't have a reliable or steady source of money that's going to come in. And that's really something that, a question that will come up also for the Bring Chicago Home real estate transfer tax. If you're just putting that, relying on revenue from higher earners to fulfill a line item in the budget, that could fluctuate pretty wildly from year to year. Whereas, like you said, property taxes and sales taxes, while more regressive, are more reliable for the, taxing bodies.
New York, they have a state income tax ranges between 4% and 11%. Would our city income tax also have to be progressive? And if so, what numbers are they talking about?
So it's a really interesting point because a lot of your listeners may know that in the Illinois Constitution, the state cannot charge a progressive or a graduated income tax. As we know, it came up for a ballot amendment a couple of years ago. The state voted it down. And so it is kind of a legal constitutional argument. But advocates of this income tax proposal point to the language in the state constitution that just says cities can't impose multiple taxes, multiple layers of taxes. And so they say, in theory, if we impose just one steady 3.5% income tax, but everyone is exempted from paying any taxes on the first $100,000 of their income, they say that would be that would pass constitutional muster. But again, that's all theoretical. We would have to see.
So that's a blending of 3.5, theoretically, against our across-the-board state income tax of 4.95%, right?
That's right.
Be blended. Okay, well, what do you think politically? When does Brandon Johnson come out and say this is the way, or does he?
Honestly, I would not count on it. Honestly, we looked into this just to try to sort of expand the conversation about what kinds of income, revenue sources would be there. Obviously, something like a city income tax would be a pretty, radical, very unpopular with a lot of folks, controversial new way of doing it. But it's to the larger point, he's going to have to come up with something big, new, radical, or he's going to have to break some promise of his.
Alex Nitkin, thanks so much for the analysis. I love your work at Illinois Answers, and we'll have you back soon. We'll see how this develops.
Thanks so much. I'll be watching.
You tax us when we're born. You tax us when we're dead. You tax us when we eat. You tax us when we sleep. You tax us every which way. Get off of my back!